Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex Medina. I am the Director of Marketing and Communications at the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation. We're going to wait for a couple minutes to allow everybody to sign on, and then we'll get started shortly. Thank you for your patience. Good morning, everybody. Like I said, we're just going to wait a couple minutes to allow everybody to log on. In the meantime, I'd like to let you know that you will be muted throughout the webinar. You can submit your questions in the question box, which you'll be able to see on your screen. And we'll allow our presenters, and we'll send them to our presenters for the Q&A at the end of our session. This session is also being recorded. So just to let you know, so thank you. All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce everybody to the President and CEO of the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation, Stephen Chung.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation, LAEDC, for a quarterly economic briefing. These quarterly briefings provide you with the most up-to-date information analysis on our regional economy and workforce. This research, along with thousands of hours of additional research, are part of LAEDC's 5-pillar strategy for economic development that will help us reach our vision of a reimagined regional economy, one that's equitable, sustainable, resilient, and growing, an economy that provides a healthy and high standard of living for all. Our 5-pillar strategy starts with the research conducted by LAEDC's Institute for Applied Economics, and it is crucial to provide a fact-based, objective understanding of our current economic landscape. These analyses help us identify and target key industries for growth and future opportunities. Our research also allows LAEDC to support the region's various initiatives and efforts to plan strategically for inclusive economic growth, resiliency, and sustainability. We then use that research to guide our programs that aim to build thriving ecosystems for industry cluster growth, business assistance, workforce development, and attracting companies to our region. One example of the work that the IAE, or the Institute for Applied Economics, provides is our annual economic forecast report, which we released in February. The 2023 LAEDC Economic Forecast, Moving Beyond the Recovery report, was presented to attendees and focused on what looms on the horizon for the US, California, and Los Angeles County regarding inflation, supply chain issues, and the effects of monetary and fiscal policy on economic growth. You can find the full report at laedc.org/economic forecast 2023, all one word. One event for the report's release offered over 400 attendees a valuable look ahead at national, state, and local economic projections with global implications. We welcome Dr. Derek Hamilton, founding director of the Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy at the New School, and former Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, who is serving as Governor Newsom's infrastructure advisor. And he was the featured closing plenary speaker on the future of infrastructure projects throughout California. Today, we'll provide an update analysis on our economy and the potential impact some current and unprecedented events might have here in Los Angeles. Just a quick reminder to please use the Q&A box to submit any questions throughout our session. And now I want to turn the presentation over to Shannon Sedgwick, our director of LAEDC's Institute for Applied Economics. Shannon?
Thank you, Stephen. Hello, and a warm welcome to everyone joining us today for LAEDC's quarterly economic briefing. We're so glad that you could be here to discuss the current state of the economy and gain insights into recent developments and trends. Today, we're going to go over both national economic conditions and the local employment situation. We'll be discussing current economic projections, inflation, the federal funds rate, credit conditions, the likelihood of a recession, and the debt ceiling. Then we'll be presenting the local employment situation in LA County, where we'll be discussing payroll jobs, the unemployment rate, job postings, and the WGA writer strike. Next slide. As we move on to the current state of the economy, I'm delighted to introduce our new senior economist, Justin Adams, who is joining us today at this briefing. Justin brings a wealth of experience and expertise in the field of economics and policy analysis to the Institute and has a deep understanding of current economic trends and developments. Please join me in welcoming Justin, where he will be sharing his insights on the current state of the economy. Justin?
Thanks, Shannon. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this morning's quarterly economic briefing at LAEDC's Institute for Applied Economics. My name is Justin Adams. I'm senior economist with IAE, and as Shannon stated, I'll be walking through the national economic conditions. So let me start. Next slide, please. Let me start with near-term and longer-term forecasts for GDP and unemployment. So the table shows the most recent economic projections made by the Federal Reserve Board members and bank presidents at their March 2023 Summary of Economic Projections report. So the Federal Reserve expects slower economic growth nationally in 2023, with real GDP at 0.4%, which compares to real GDP of about 0.9% in 2022. They're expecting that GDP will pick back up in 2024 and 2025, eventually settling at a 1.8% annual growth rate. And that assumes that there are no economic shocks and that appropriate monetary policy is being followed. So you'll note that these projections are slightly more pessimistic than their December 2022 forecasts, which reflects the persistence of inflation and the need to continue raising interest rates. Looking at unemployment, can you go back? Thank you. Looking at unemployment, the Federal Reserve expects unemployment nationally to jump to 4.5% in 2023, which is up from 3.6% last year. And this increase is attributed to the Fed's efforts to slow the economy to rein in inflation. And we see that unemployment will linger around 4.6% with the expectation that it'll eventually settle around 4.0% over the longer term. The Fed was expecting slightly higher unemployment in 2023, but revised these expectations downwards based on continued strength in the labor market. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's turn now to inflation. So back in February, when we presented our economic forecast for 2023, we pointed out essentially that the nation had recovered from the pandemic in the middle of 2022. So the economic story of 2022 was less about the pandemic and more about inflation and the Federal Reserve's efforts to tamp it down. So in the chart on the left, we see the consumer price index for the United States and for the Los Angeles region over the past 15 years. And we see that CPI kicks up around 2020 for both the US and LA, reflecting higher inflation due to supply chain issues. Interestingly, prices in Los Angeles had already been growing at a faster rate compared to the nation as a whole, starting in around 2015. That divergence between the US and Los Angeles began to change during the pandemic, however. We see in the chart on the right, the year-over-year changes in CPI. And since September 2020, the inflation rate in the LA area has been at or below that of the US. And this likely reflects the fact that LA took a little bit longer to rebound from the pandemic than the nation as a whole, but it's unclear whether this trend is going to continue into the future. Okay, so let's take a look at core inflation. So core inflation strips out food, shelter, and energy, these categories can be highly volatile. So looking at core inflation, it gives you a good sense of the underlying gauge of price rises. And this chart shows the year-over-year changes in CPI for the nation over the past 15 years. So you see core inflation kind of trending downwards in a narrow band until the spring of 2021, when then it shoots skyward. This was sort of the perfect storm where shortages from supply chain disruptions met up with consumers that had more money from pandemic stimulus and also from paychecks as they returned to reopened economies. And this spike is what caught the attention of the Federal Reserve. Although for a while the Fed thought that this inflation would be transitory. It turns out, of course, that it wasn't. This inflation became more entrenched. And so the Fed shifted into high gear to raise interest rates and try to tamp down inflation. So you can see that the Fed's efforts have borne fruit in that core inflation has come down significantly in early 2022. As of last month, though, it stood at 3.7%, which is better, but still higher than the Fed's stated goal of 2.0% inflation. So there's still more work to do by the Fed. Next slide, please. Okay, so does this mean that the Federal Reserve will continue to raise interest rates? That's unclear. After letting interest rates hover near zero during the pandemic, the Fed rapidly raised them starting in 2022, instituting 7 rate hikes last year and then 3 more this year. There are indications that the Fed could be done raising interest rates or is nearly done raising interest rates. But as we saw from the last slide, high inflation is still with us. So this suggests that the Fed is likely to leave high interest rates in place for the near term, basically to keep the foot on the brake of the economy. So that means don't expect to see lower interest rates for home mortgages or auto loans anytime soon. Next slide. Okay, so how have higher interest rates affected credit conditions nationally? So this chart shows the year-over-year change in commercial bank lending for commercial and industrial loans and for consumer loans over the past 15 years. The growth in commercial and consumer loans has slowed since the second quarter of 2022, but the growth in commercial loans remained above double digits until this year. So in the first quarter of 2023, the growth was still positive, but only 1.9%. This is for commercial loans. For consumer loans, growth dropped to the single digits in the last quarter of 2022, but still notched 6.1% growth last quarter. So it'll be interesting to see the latest data is for Q1. So it'll be interesting to see if this year's interest rate hikes push commercial and consumer lending negative in the second quarter of this year. Next slide, please. Okay, the R word. So raising interest rates to cool the economy, it's kind of a blunt tool. The Federal Reserve's goal is to engineer a soft landing for the economy, where the nation experiences a short period of flat growth. So it's just enough to eliminate inflation, but not enough to push us into a recession. But that, of course, is easier said than done, especially since the effects of any given rate hike might not be felt for months. So there are some metrics that suggest that a soft landing is increasingly unlikely, however. So the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, they track the term spread between the 10-year and 3-month Treasury rates. They use that as a gauge to estimate the likelihood of a recession sometime in the next 12 months. So the blue line in this chart shows the probability stretching all the way back to 1959. And then the gray bars show actual recessions that have occurred. And these are defined by the National Bureau of Economic Research. And so the chart shows that there is some predictive power here for using these term spreads. So prior to the Fed's 2022 rate hikes, the term spread suggested that the probability of a recession in early 2023 was about 5%. Once the rate hikes began in earnest, this probability started to skyrocket. And right now, the likelihood of seeing a recession by April 2024 stands at over 68%. Of course, this is not a guarantee that we'll get a recession, but rarely over the past 60 years have we seen probabilities this high. And then also, it's important to note that even if we might enter a recession, this chart can't tell us about its duration or about how severe it might be. Next slide. Oh, okay, and this is the final slide for me. So let me conclude on a cheerful note, talking about what's on the horizon, which is the US debt ceiling. So if inflation weren't enough to deal with, we have the standoff over the US debt ceiling kind of hanging over us. And essentially the president and Congress need to come up with a debt ceiling resolution by early June to prevent a default on the nation's debt. History doesn't provide us with a lot of guidance regarding the ramifications to the economy of a default, pretty much because we've never experienced one before in the nation's history. But every indication suggests that we'd all be better off not finding out. So at its heart, a default would mean the country wouldn't have enough money to pay its bills. So it would have to prioritize payments likely to bondholders, meaning that some won't get paid right away. So that could be Social Security recipients, it could be federal contractors. It's unclear how that prioritization would work. But a default technically could be short-lived, and that's because the federal government is expecting to get a boost of tax payments later in June. So there is some discussion that we could experience a default, but it would be short. But even a short-term default could prove devastating to the economy, given that so much financial activity around the world relies on a stable dollar. So in a report this month, Moody's Analytics forecasts that a short default of no more than a week would be enough to push the US into recession, with the nation ultimately losing 1.5 million jobs at the trough of this recession, and seeing the unemployment rate going from 3.4% to 5.0%. In California, they project that a short default, so less than a week, would be enough to result in job losses of 130,000 here in the state, with unemployment eventually peaking at 5.6%. So that's for a short-term default. Any sort of prolonged situation would have more severe consequences. So let's hope that lawmakers in Washington can reach a deal quickly so that we don't have to actually judge how accurate these forecasts are. So with that, I will hand it back over to Shannon.
Thank you, Justin, for that insightful presentation. We'll now be transitioning to the local employment situation here in Los Angeles County. This data is covering the month of April 2023. Next slide, please. As Justin mentioned, as of November 2022, Los Angeles County recovered the total number of payroll jobs that we lost as a result of the COVID pandemic. As a reminder, we shed just over 784,000 payroll jobs in 2 months' time between March and April of 2020, and it took roughly 2.5 years to recover. So between March of 2023 and April of 2023, total non-farm employment in Los Angeles County increased by close to 30,000 to more than 4.6 million. Private education and health services led this monthly growth, adding roughly 9,000 jobs over the period. Year over year, Los Angeles County non-farm employment increased by just over 106,000 jobs, 2.3% increase. And annual job growth was led by private education and health services, adding just over 49,000 jobs, followed by leisure and hospitality, adding just over 35,000 jobs. So we'll dive a little bit more into specific industry performance in just a bit. Next slide. Here we look at the monthly change in the number of non-farm jobs in Los Angeles County, and this really highlights the length of time that it took for us to dig out of the hole that COVID left us in. But we've made it beyond recovery. And as of April of 2023, we've gained just over 16,000 non-farm jobs over that of which we had in February of 2020, just before the pandemic hit. So we have 2.1% more non-farm jobs in April than was lost in those 2 months of March and April of 2020, with the big scary red bar showing that decline. Next slide, please.
Shannon, before you go on, we have a question asking if you can increase your volume a little bit. They're having some problem hearing you. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Is that a little bit better?
Yes, much better.
Okay. So here we have the unadjusted unemployment rate for Los Angeles County. So in April, it was 4.5%, and that's falling 0.5 percentage points from March, the month prior, and 0.3 percentage points from the year prior of April 2022. The unemployment rate in Los Angeles County and in California, it's been hovering around pre-pandemic levels since March of 2022. Next slide, please. If we look at the monthly change in jobs by industry, we see healthcare and social assistance leading the way, followed closely by arts, entertainment, and recreation, with 7,500 jobs and 7,300 jobs respectively. On the opposite end, we see losses in the accommodation and food services industry and in motion pictures and sound recording industry. A quick note that job growth in other industries in the information sector, such as data processing, hosting, and related services, absorbed that 1,000 jobs that were lost in motion pictures and sound recording industries. Next slide. Here we look at jobs data year over year, allows us to compare our current employment situation with that of the year prior, taking seasonality into account. And so when we compare this year's data to last year's, we see that most industries are in a much better position. But there are a few things happening here. Most industries have added jobs, with healthcare and social assistance again leading the way. Motion picture and sound recording industries are slowing now that the backlog of productions related to the pandemic have been worked through. We're not yet seeing any of the effects of the strike. That's not yet. So this decline is related to the backlog being worked through. So it's just slowing down and not even slowing down, more adjusting back to normal levels. And then we see wholesale starting to slow now that consumption's beginning to cool along with the rest of the economy. And again, as consumption's cooling, there's a backlog of inventory that has to be worked through at warehouses as well. And that's having an impact on what's happening at our ports currently as well. Next slide. So to get a better understanding of the longer lasting impacts that the pandemic had on industry employment, we'd like to compare the current economic base with that of the same period pre-pandemic. So here we're looking at industry employment in April of 2023 versus that of April in 2019. So despite Los Angeles recovering the absolute number of jobs lost, the jobs today look totally different. We have additional gains in essential industries and those allowing remote work, so knowledge-based industries, and then additional losses occurring in the hospitality sector and other non-essential industries. And a lot of this is related to the fact that business travel, international travel still hasn't rebounded to the same levels, so tourism is still low, and we are also feeling the effects of remote and hybrid work schedules that are impacting our central business districts as people aren't coming back into these areas to support businesses. Next slide. Here we have the total monthly job postings in Los Angeles County, and we look at this as an indicator. So job postings have been declining, and so that's indicating that we have slower job growth ahead. When we look at the industries that are posting these opportunities, we see that, in the month of April, the industries with the most unique job postings included professional business services. They had over 18,000 unique job postings in April. Healthcare and social assistance had close to 12,000 unique job postings. Retail had just over 6,000 job postings, and manufacturing had over just 6,000 job postings in April too. Gives you an idea of what's still growing and what might be slowing down. Next slide, please. So the 2023 Writers Guild of America strike. It's an ongoing labor dispute between the Writers Guild, which is a labor union, and the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. And so that began on Tuesday of May 2nd, earlier this month. As with any work stoppage, the duration of the strike is really going to be key in determining the true economic impact that it has on our local economy. So the longer that the strike goes on, of course, the more it will cost our local economy. So negotiations are involving residual payments. That's really kind of the big hurdle that needs to be crossed. And we want to point out that writers are what they call above the line workers, and they're a pre-production cost. And so they earn a set wage or a negotiated contractual wage on the front or back end of any given project. And that means that streamers and their changed model of using short pilots and mini seasons comprised of just 6 to 8 episodes have eaten into the earnings of those writers, who now find themselves working a series of less lucrative short mini room writing gigs. So additional threats also include the future threat that AI poses. So much as the previous contract negotiation was concerned about the new technology of streaming back in 2007, 2008, now we're concerned about AI. And so that's going to be another a big issue in the negotiations. Now this round of negotiations, we've got new members at the table compared to last time. Last time the streamers like Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and others, they weren't included, but they are this round. And so we aren't really sure what to expect from these new players, and that could potentially extend these negotiations. If the strike is as long as some might expect, we're already a few weeks in, then it will start to negatively impact our industry here, and especially streamers. So right now, they do have a pipeline of scripted content, but once they work through that, it may start to impact their bottom line, because remember, there's subscriptions based, and so subscribers may drop off if their content becomes stale. So overall, I think it's important to really remember that the economic cost of this strike is more than just lost wages for the writers and production workers. The more production is impacted, the more businesses in the industry supply chain, caterers, equipment rental houses, the more that it will negatively impact, that ripple effect will reduce the spending in the supply chain and by workers in the industry and workers in the supply chain. So that's that indirect and induced impact that we always talk about. And so the longer the stoppage, the more it represents additional revenue that's lost in our region. Next slide. Okay. So this concludes our presentation, and this is the part where we have time for questions. So we'll bring both Stephen and Justin back in, and we're open to taking your questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Justin. We have one question so far. We're hoping that we're going to get more. So attendees, please start typing your questions into the chat. We have the first question from Kenta Estrada Darley, and she asks, is it normal for LA County's unemployment rate to be higher than the US?
I'll jump in. I'll say yes, as well as for California's. And I guess I'd make 2 points. First, you wouldn't expect California or LA to have necessarily have the same unemployment rate. There's a different mix of industries and jobs and skills. So you're going to see some divergence. But I would probably, my second point is say that, there are a number of policies that have come out of Sacramento that have made it more difficult for employers to hire, whether it's just additional regulations or required benefits that you're seeing in California that you're not seeing nationally. So that just adds a little bit of friction to the mix.
And I'll just jump in to say that, as of late, because of the mix of industries and how heavily the Los Angeles County economy relies on the tourism industry, um, we we haven't, and because we have so many concentrated areas where you have the central business districts, right? So both of those things are causing our unemployment to be higher because they haven't rebounded completely from the pandemic. So you're not having that business travel. Your conventions haven't rebounded. People are still heavily reliant on Zoom. Not everyone's coming back into the city, and international tourism is down. So as a result of COVID, our overall unemployment rate is just higher. People are looking for jobs.
Shannon and Justin, to follow up with that, I wanted to ask a little bit. Previously done the research for the county, the Pathways for Economic Resiliency during COVID, and stated that LA County's makeup in terms of the companies that are here, about 94% of all LA County companies have less than 20 employees. Does that mix of having such a large number of small businesses put us at risk when it comes to kind of the employment rate, especially in light of the recession?
I don't know that so LA County has a large number of small businesses, but I don't think that is an artifact that is restricted to LA County. It is kind of it. I would say it's more universal. So I don't know that places us more at risk um, than any other area.
Great, thank you for that. There are a number of questions that just popped up, so let's jump through all of them. One is asking, how should community colleges react to the writer's strike? Many community colleges have TV and film programs, and most of those students are skill builders. So your answer to how should community colleges react to the strike?
Sure, I'll take that. Um, so the writer's strike right now, I pointed out that they're above the line workers and that they have a different way of calculate how their earnings are calculated. And so a lot of the production jobs are hourly. So even though they're also having to deal with these shorter seasons and pilots, um, it doesn't have that same kind of impact that it has in terms of how it affects their earnings. So they are going to be challenged because now they're jumping from project to project, but with an hourly wage, as long as they have a project, it's not impacting. They're not relying on syndication, they're not relying on the production size or on revenues, gross revenues at box office or whatever. So it's kind of a subset of the writers that are being impacted, and they're above the line. Other above the line roles include directors, actors, so it's calculated differently.
Another question came in. Can you expand on the types of jobs included in the growing healthcare and social assistance category? How does this square with the Southern California hospitals reporting financial losses in 2022 and statewide efforts to shore up hospitals?
So basically, when it comes to healthcare, you're seeing healthcare workers and allied healthcare professionals being added to payrolls. So that can mean anything from doctors to an x-ray tech to a phlebotomist. It's really kind of spread far and wide. We are facing a shortage in nurses, especially for specialty nurses. And so there's a lot of movement that happens in that space too. There's a lot of job postings there. 2022, because of additional requirements related to the pandemic, in terms of PPE, in terms of required services offered and additional measures that had to be taken. The hospital industry, they were hit pretty hard in terms of their revenues. So hopefully going forward, we'll be able to rebound there.
And I would add that so they had additional expenses hospitals did during COVID, but also the reimbursement rates for Medicare and Medi-Cal were not increased. So they felt pressure there. That hasn't helped their bottom line.
Yeah.
Thank you. Eduardo Martinez asks, is international migration expected to resume its past role in more than offsetting negative net domestic migration for the region?
I'll jump in and say, yes, there are expectations that international migration will pick up. There's kind of a divergence of opinion, though, on the extent to which it'll make a difference. It kind of depends on who you listen to. If you listen to the California Department of Finance, they have a demography unit where they are projecting the future demographics of the state. They're actually expecting a much more rosy scenario going forward. They're expecting that this net migration might slow and potentially reverse in the next couple of years. If you talk to PPIC, they're slightly more pessimistic, expecting this domestic net migration to continue. So it's unclear sort of what's going on as far as the domestic net migration and how much international migration we're going to get to offset this. But I'll just say there's a divergence of opinion, but it should help.
There's about 3 minutes left, so we probably won't be able to get through all the questions. There's one more about international. Has foreign direct investment decreased into LA County at all? If so, any idea of the magnitude?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question. I'm sorry.
Sorry, the question is, for foreign direct investment, have we seen a decrease in foreign direct investment into the region? And if so, what is the magnitude?
That is not something I'm familiar with off the top of my head. So I'll
Shannon, if
pass on that for now.
I can jump in, I'm trying to pull up the most recent report. LAEDC and the World Trade Center Los Angeles, which is a part of LAEDC, conducts an annual FBI report that was just released recently. I'm trying to pull up the exact number, but there has been some fluctuation throughout California. And I'm trying to get you the exact number while I'm buying time here. Shannon, if you have that information, great. If not, I'll just skip on to the next question. I'll jump right back once I have that question. Thank you for the question, Joe Ferrier. One more question there is, how does LAEDC plan on addressing the employment issue? What action steps are being planned to be taken? I can answer that as well, but I'm trying to look up the information. So Shannon, if you don't mind pulling up the FBI data so that we can share that specific number with Joel while I answer Gabriel Adelar's question. LAEDC currently is working very closely with a number of different partners. One of the things that we were asked to take on is the California Economic Resilience Fund project, the SURF project. If you have not been engaged, and I please would love to have the entire audience member join us and go to our website, laedc.org/CERF surf, so that you can get the information about this process. This is a state of California process that allows LAEDC to be the regional convener in partnership with the California Community Foundation, so that we can do a planning process to engage our communities to look for a transition to a carbon neutral economy that can actually create a high road transition partnership that really creates an opportunity for job creation and entrepreneurship opportunities for the most disinvested and underinvested communities throughout the region. Our hope is to align those engagement aspects with the community with future opportunities. As I was mentioning earlier when we're opening, is that our goal is to identify the industries that are growing, like bioscience industry or the aerospace and defense industry, and see how we can make sure that those job opportunities that are going to be created and those entrepreneurship opportunities that are created are available to our targeted communities that have been left out of the recovery. So how do we make sure that we're going to align those opportunities with the communities directly? So please get involved. That's how we're going to be answering and addressing those issues in particular. Shannon, any update on the FDI number?
Yes. So the most recent FDI report that was just released in April at the Select LA event, it actually shows an increase in the number of jobs of foreign-owned enterprises and the number of establishments. So the number of establishments of foreign-owned enterprises went up by over 270 establishments, and job increase was about 5,400 jobs that were added. And so FDI seems to be holding relatively strong. We saw declines between 2021 and 2022, but from 2022 to 2023, we're seeing the tide turn and some rebounds being made.
Great. And Shannon, I just want to add to that part as well. I just want to emphasize that although we've seen an increase this year, during COVID, we did see a sharp decrease over the entire region, not only for Los Angeles region, but also California as a whole. So foreign direct investment continues to play a significant role in this entire region. So we definitely would like to see more of these international companies investing here locally. And so this is another aspect of what LAEDC is going to try to tackle, and to attract new companies from around the world so that they can create more jobs and more business opportunities here. As we're running overtime now by 2 minutes, I want to once again thank you, Shannon and Justin, and the rest of the IAE team for all your hard work preparing this economic briefing. And thank you all for joining us today. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out directly to us. And also, you'll see on your screen a list of our upcoming events. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you in person. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and see you at our next forecast and our next events. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.